If they're planning things like cyber attacks or sharing vulnerabilities on places you're not looking, Telegram, the dark web, you need to have visibility to that because that's a major blind spot. Intelligence and gathering intelligence is not always about having all the answers, but knowing where to find the answers for the questions you don't know.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the LifeRaft Security Conversation Series. I'm your host, Robert Ballew, and today I'm joined by our resident Navigator product specialist, Tristan Lauer. Our topic today explores how you can use social media monitoring to safeguard your events, as well as some practical tips and tricks on how to improve your organization's security program. But first, a little bit about Tristan. Like I said, he's a product specialist here at LifeRaft. His day-to-day responsibilities involve advising clients on how to use open web sources to safeguard their operations, and his latest projects have involved assisting with a number of high-profile events, including sports, concerts, and conventions. Tristan, thanks for joining me today.
No, thanks for having me, Rob.
So when we were talking ahead of the show, first thing I asked is, over the past year, what's changed a lot about your role? What's something that's cropping up a lot? And the biggest thing that you mentioned is you're doing a lot more monitoring of events. So why is event security becoming a bigger issue in your workload?
Well, I mean, I don't know if there's been a time in the last lifetime of OSINT or in the entire lifetime of OSINT where there's been such a dramatic change over the span of 2 years. The pandemic had locked everything down. Now the world's opening back up. Many areas of the world are seeing more unrest than they had previously, both local and abroad. COVID rules and regulations are something that everybody is now adjusting to, which is very different from really anything we've experienced. And now travel is starting to open back up, both more local, international, and people are gathering in large groups. So there's just a natural increased risk factor. And that trend is probably going to continue in the coming months, probably right through till the end of 2023 when we kind of finally achieve hopefully that new normal.
It's nice to see people in 3D again for the first time in a year.
Yeah, definitely a change and a much needed change.
What I found kind of interesting, though, is people's social skills have been a little bit rusty. You see that some of these like sports events, fans don't know what to do, or their manners are a little off, or in the line at the airport, people are just a bit more on edge. Not quite like last time.
There's a big difference between yelling at a player or somebody on the field that's on your TV and yelling and getting aggressive with somebody at the game. People being removed from stadiums, people getting belligerent, having a few too many drinks. And that stuff may have been going on before, but it's certainly covered more in the media because there hasn't been any of that for so long.
So why don't we go back, like Security 101, just give me the definition of what do you mean exactly by social media monitoring?
So social media monitoring is just about awareness of what is being posted on open source channels. Who's posting what, where, and when. And the puzzle to solve with social media monitoring is how you can best collect, organize, and triage that intelligence to the right stakeholders as efficiently as possible to mitigate risk.
So by open sources, you mentioned like social media, but it's much broader than just the main big platforms.
Yeah, your big players, your big social platforms, but also things like news, blogs, boards. Leveraging human intelligence wherever possible as well is incredibly valuable. And pairing and attaching all of that together to really have that full scope of situational awareness and a strong threat assessment is all a piece of the puzzle.
So for the context of, say I'm the manager of a major concert venue or a sports venue or something along that line, what kind of value can I get out of social media monitoring in that context?
So it's really increasing your situational awareness and understanding what sort of chatter might be out there that could pose a threat to your business. One of the changes that we've seen over the last couple months while things open up is a big shift to digital. So now things like fraudulent tickets are no longer a hard copy printed ticket, but tickets that are purchased legitimately with a stolen credit card and then resold before they can be compromised or identified. And that puts venues and customers and really everybody at risk for that fraudulent activity.
Kind of adds that second set of eyes. You have your security team that's right on the ground, but now you get to incorporate everybody else that might be attending the event when you start watching this stuff online.
Yeah, if anything has happened in the last 2 years is people love to talk about what they're doing, what they're planning, and what they hope to accomplish with a particular task. And there's no shortage of information out there, which can make it really hard to get everything and properly evaluate everything as close to real time as possible.
I think it's surprising how much people are willing to share. Like you were kind of hinting at there, like you saw that with the Capitol riots, people being very free, admitting about the type of illegal activities that were occurring and what they were participating in, and all that kind of stuff can be quite useful.
Especially with the emergence of more platforms that are not so restrictive on some of the language and topics that can be discussed, it opens it up even more. And that means you have to look in more places, which is naturally harder to do especially if you're doing something manually.
You mentioned sports tickets, and that was one of the examples that I found quite interesting, where what people were posting online. I also just found some crazy examples with like years ago, the Minnesota Vikings, and that whereas everyone was planning to storm the field at the end of their last game or something. And so having that advanced knowledge and that kind of situational awareness really helps. And the ticket sales, the same thing. Like it's not even necessarily criminals that are looking to outsmart the system, but just your fans or the people attending the events or your staff that might be making these kind of mistakes that could be helpful for those types of individuals.
Yeah, it's not just tickets, it's credentials. People are so happy to be back out into the world. Check out my pass to the game, check out my special access. People are also struggling financially. So there was an example with the Super Bowl where somebody ran onto the field during arguably the biggest stage in the world. And there was conversations afterwards that it was as a result to cash in on a bet. So knowing that type of intelligence in advance, you can identify the person, potentially be on the lookout for them, notify authorities, maybe even deny entry if possible to mitigate that risk.
And it's helpful too, because a lot of the people, your fans certainly, or people working at your business aren't always aware of the kind of security repercussions. Before I got into the security industry, I never thought about what I was posting online that would pose a real threat, but it can get people access to places they're not supposed to be, or put a VIP's life in danger, and those kind of issues.
Yeah, the most innocent posts or innocent content from a well-meaning person could expose vulnerabilities at an event. And the bigger event, the more potential there is for vulnerabilities. And smaller events typically run with smaller teams, which naturally could incur more risk with a lack of security or visibility on what those risks are.
So we kind of hinted a bit at this, but maybe just give me the rundown of the specific types of threats that you're usually looking for when you are carrying out this activity.
Obviously, fraudulent tickets and credentials that could pose a risk for access, people running on the field, people becoming violent. There was a major event over the weekend where a number of individuals were arrested in very close proximity to a major event. They had over 1,000 rounds of ammunition, body armor, and visibility to the actual event itself. And it posed a risk of a Las Vegas style shooting that happened a couple of years ago at a concert. Fortunately, it doesn't appear based on authorities' feedback that was directly connected, but those circumstances are very coincidental. And if somebody had taken action and one of the people posted on Facebook that they wanted to go out in a big way, that could have huge implications and potentially casualties. That it's not just the immediate event, but the aftermath of that event could put something major like that in jeopardy.
Getting ahead of the threat.
Absolutely. If you're relying on human intelligence and news reports, you're behind. You're going to miss so much. You're going to expose yourself to vulnerabilities that are going to be difficult to catch up on. So the more you can be proactive, the more you can implement workflows and automate those workflows, the more value that you're going to have from the information you're collecting, because it will be attained faster, triaged more effectively, and really assessed and analyzed appropriately to prioritize what the actual risks are.
A lot of other things that might come up when you're running events, you might be worried about data leak, those kind of things getting out. Can you explain more about that?
So if we were to take a look at something like a major event like the Sun Valley Conference that was occurring this month, where many of the major billionaires and richest people in the world congregate in one place for several days, things like itineraries, hotels, where they're meeting, what they're meeting about, who they're meeting with, those all potentially expose vulnerabilities. So if internal emails or itineraries or even credit cards or phone numbers are released, that type of compromise can put both the event and the individuals at risk and make that security team have to allocate resources to something that shouldn't have been so easily compromised. The emergence of so many ransomware attacks now, that's something that is very top of mind for me. We've seen pipelines and infrastructure attacks. What would happen if those type of activities were to start to infiltrate events? If the biggest stages like the Olympics or the Euro Cup sort of suffer a cyber attack, what would those implications be? And how would you even go about addressing it if you weren't able to have fans access the stadium or turn on the power in the stadium? That could be obviously detrimental to operations.
I found some of the interesting ones with like movie studios, worried about paparazzi that might be taking a photo of a movie recording or a movie set that they're not supposed to be able to, and spoiling a surprise or giving the whereabouts where a VIP might be staying at the moment.
Yeah, there's few people that are more passionate about things other than sports teams, sports events, gamers, pulp culture, movie studios, new shows that are being filmed that have huge fan followings. People want as much information as possible, and spoilers and scripts and access. There's huge demand for that from people who shouldn't have access to it. So also could pose potential risks or vulnerabilities.
So I want to kind of take this conversation to, real practical tips for maybe the security analysts in that's actually monitoring these events. Then maybe some practical tips for the security manager that might be interacting with C-suite executives who are advocating for this program. So starting from the beginning, the internet's a big place. When I started my own OSINT investigations and getting involved into this space, where do you advise analysts to find the best intel online?
The internet is a big place, but the business world is a big place as well. So knowing your audience is paramount in social media monitoring. Who are they? Where do they gather? Where do they share their views? What are their historical activities? Some threats are very overt, easy to spot, recruited for. Those are really the low-hanging fruit that you can collect actionable intelligence without a big time investment. Now, some of the other challenges is if they're planning things like cyber attacks or sharing vulnerabilities on places you're not looking, Telegram, the dark web, you need to have visibility to that because that's a major blind spot. And intelligence and gathering intelligence is not always about having all the answers, but knowing where to find the answers for the questions you don't know, and then prioritizing from there.
You kind of hinted on alt tech there, which I really clued into. I know that's been becoming a bigger and bigger theme. Can you just explain exactly what those sites are and why they're super relevant for security teams to follow?
Yeah, so something like the dark web or the Tor browser has a lot of marketplaces and chat areas where people are moving product or information regarding individuals or groups. Telegram has been a really popular place over the years that has grown in popularity over the last couple of years, where you can almost like a Reddit style interaction where people are talking about similar pieces of information in small groups or very large groups for that matter, depending on what the topic is. And as those new places emerge or expand in use, some of them have been around for a long time, like Reddit, for example, you want to make sure that you've got visibility into there and know what conversations are happening there. Because if they don't really pose a risk, you probably still want to keep your eyes on it because it can very quickly change directions in kind of the increased climate that we're dealing with potential aggressions towards a company or business or people trying to exploit or take advantage of vulnerabilities.
Right. The probability of uncovering a threat on a tiny social network is pretty small. But if you're covering 10 of these and one of them happens to spot something relevant on those sites, that could be a huge implications for business continuity or the safety of your team.
Yep. It's all about listening broadly.
Right. A threat might emerge on Instagram, but you got to dive into some of these smaller alt tech sites in order to really get a full picture of what's going on.
Exactly.
So kind of going back to social media monitoring more generally, I would assume that monitoring a live event is going to look a little bit different than, say, conducting an OSINT investigation afterwards. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're doing an investigation afterwards, you've got some pieces of information about what occurred, potentially who caused it or what the disruption was. When you have a live event, you have a good idea of how it could be impacted, but the scope of what could happen greatly outweighs what you're typically looking for. So that's a lot of data. And I typically categorize threats into two groups, the ones you know about and the ones you don't know about. And you need to prioritize the threats that you do know about so you have something to work with. For threats you don't know about, you need to actively be listening, get really broadly to make them become threats that you do know about through validation. And identifying the who are they, what is their online presence, where are they located, what level of influence do they have? And if you can automate that process, it allows you to collect much broader. And then you can spot those new threats that you may not have been actively seeking out before. A lot of the heavy lifting is done through automation for you. And then once it's prioritized, you can and have to continually reevaluate the landscape. Once prioritized, you need to continually reevaluate the threat landscape and how it's changing and be quick to adjust as new information presents itself.
Well, it all gets back to casting that wide net too. Because I mean, you look at an example like the Capitol riots, where if you're on Reddit or something a bit more mainstream, you might not see a lot of the planning or the activities that are going on, but you just have to go over to one of the alt tech sites, Parler or Gab, and there's all those kind of things taking place there. I would assume be pretty similar for any kind of event security monitoring.
Absolutely. In that example, there was hundreds of people live streaming the event in real time. Talking about having boots on the ground and actionable intelligence, the people actually partaking in it are giving you all the intelligence you need in real time. And when events like that occur, it's not just the intended target, it's things that are in close proximity to that. I'm sure businesses and operations in and around the Capitol building were impacted as well. And that's where situational awareness comes into play. Know your surroundings, know what their vulnerabilities could be and how those vulnerabilities could negatively impact your operation or your event.
We talked pre-recording about some of the events that you're monitoring for our clients. We obviously won't discuss specifics because that's not what we do here. But you've done a lot of these now. What are some of the common mistakes that maybe you see in other event monitoring situations, or things that you've kind of learned along the way that crop up a lot for beginners?
The biggest mistake I see is that the focus or the scope of what they're monitoring for is too narrow. And it's because they're doing too much manually. If you're spending 80% of your time gathering information and 20% of the time analyzing it, you're doing it wrong. You need to spend 20% of your time collecting it through automation and 80% of the time analyzing and triaging it. The time swing there allows you to be so much more informed on so many more topics to limit those blind spots that could potentially be exploited by a threat actor. You start broad and then pivot. It allows you, again, to really hone in on the most important tasks at hand, whichever they may be. And those can change over time, which is why it's so important to pivot. And as the last year has shown us, huge swaths of people have migrated from one social platform to the other. It makes it harder to monitor those channels. And the more automation that you have, the more chances you have of finding that golden nugget that you can prevent whatever it is you're trying to prevent for your event, whether it's the drone or the fake tickets or a potential physical threat actor.
Keeping in imagination. I mean, the conversations that they're having are always changing, the keywords they're using, and keeping up to date with those kind of issues.
Yeah, absolutely. The English language is tricky. There's all kinds of little tricks and nuances that you can use for hiding the language, using code words or code names or synonyms or emojis. Those are all things that if you're looking in the right places, you'll be able to spot those trends or have a system in place to spot those trends for you. So you can change your data collection processes to, again, limit those blind spots and really hone in on how people are talking. And, even in my advanced age of 35, I see how younger coworkers and other individuals speak now. It's very drastically different from how I would engage online. So being able to spot those trends and adjust my investigative skills certainly pays dividends.
You're making me feel old, man. I didn't appreciate that. What are some good resources for someone that's looking to sharpen their skill set and get better at this?
It's really impressive of how many people and how many different skill sets are part of your security teams and GSOCs and event monitoring. Your peers are truly your most valuable resource. You need to be able to collaborate and network and share success stories and failures. And event security and social media monitoring are not a one-size-fits-all solution. So the more you know about what's out there and what you struggle with or what you're successful in is really valuable intelligence to your peers. Learn from their successes, join networking groups, engage your partners to learn the latest and greatest techniques. Talk to those new employees and new hires that are coming in that have this incredible tribal knowledge from other places that you can capitalize on and improve your operation. That's definitely my go-to when we bring in new members or I'm engaging with new potential clients about ways that we can better our knowledge base.
I think what always impressed me about practitioners in the security field is you'll see their business and they're fiercely competitive on marketing or dealing for customers or buying land or whatever business that they engage in. But then on their security side, everyone's working together to identify the threats and the best practices.
Yeah, everybody moves around. I had some experience working with law enforcement years ago in another life, and they move around a lot. And that opportunity to share that intelligence from totally different organizations with each other is something that often isn't tapped into enough. And you see a little bit of that with the security teams moving around. And when people have social media monitoring tools, a tool or several tools that they utilize, just that knowledge about what's out there and what works for who and why, paramount to success.
So taking our conversation maybe a little bit higher up into the org chart, what are the common hurdles that maybe a security manager or leader in the field might run into when trying to adopt a threat intelligence program?
Right sizing of the team can be really challenging. If you've got a small team in a big global company, it's impossible to turn over every rock, and kind of aligns with the automation. The more you can automate, the more coverage you have, and the less risky experience. And sometimes one tool can do a lot for you. Other times you need a fleet of tools to help out with various use cases and potential risks. Now, on the other end, if you're a really big team, you need to be organized and have those proper workflows in place. What do you actually do with this information once it's identified? You don't just bookmark it and circle back to it in a couple of days. You need to be able to expand your investigation, start to go down those rabbit holes to see what more information you can uncover. And if you're siloed and not working collaboratively and not documenting properly, that again opens up vulnerabilities. You need to have effective communication, effective organization. So those blind spots, which sometimes are very avoidable, are really narrowed down and the gap is closed, so you can really provide the proper event security and find the proper. Yeah, there we go.
So kind of taking our conversation maybe a little bit broader, what are some things that you're curious about right now?
So the two big things that certainly pique my interest are, what are the lasting effects of the pandemic going to be in event security? There's all kinds of new trends that will likely emerge as things shift digital and people are back in the seats. And we've already seen that emergence of ransomware attacks that could find its way into major events. And as people move from one social media platform to the next, as they've done in the last 2 years, none of them have really emerged as the next major player. There's certainly a piece of the industry out there for them, but when that next player emerges in the social landscape, what is it going to look like? How is it going to be different? And how could potential threat actors exploit it to their benefit?
I like that point that you made about ransomware. I mean, we've seen these attacks mostly with hard assets like infrastructure or businesses like hospitals. But I could imagine if you have a big event coming up that can be interrupted, that's a big impetus to pay a big bill.
Yeah, absolutely. And those big global stages are prime for vulnerable actions against threat actors.
Tristan, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. What is the one takeaway that you want our listeners to remember from our conversation?
Evolve and adapt your techniques, because if you're not evolving and changing your techniques and strategies, you're going to be missing out on business critical information that really should have been easily spotted. And if you can automate those processes wherever possible, it's really going to pay dividends in security and safety of your team, events, assets, and the people that are in close proximity to them.
Tristan, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure, Rob. Hope to speak to you again soon.
Again, that was Tristan Lauer, product specialist here at LifeRaf. Thanks again for listening to the LifeRaf Security Conversation series. If you'd like more practical tips on how to use social media monitoring to safeguard your organization, be sure to check out our blog at liferafinc.com/resources. That's liferafinc.com/resources. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll tune in next time.